Hello and welcome to the race edition of the Monaco Race Weekend's Data Analysis, the series in which I compile a absolute mega crap ton of information and data and pit all of the teammates together and see exactly how well they have performed, as well as giving an overview of the entire Grand Prix, looking at position charts, lap time charts, as well as some new clean air lap pace. I am running and trialling a new algorithm sort of producing tables for different stints and tyres and seeing who was quickest in which particular stint in clean air. So if you like all of the new changes and you like this style of video, then please let me know down in the comments below. The support is much appreciated. I will try and keep this under 30 minutes as best I can. They normally range around 25 to 26 minutes. As well, everything will be timestamped in the description down below, so you can happily skip to whichever team or segment of the video you would like me to talk about. But without further ado, we will now jump on into the race data of the Monaco Grand Prix and just quickly recap the race results. It was Max Verstappen who claimed his first Monaco Grand Prix victory, 9 seconds clear of Carlos Sainz, his first podium for Ferrari, and Norris once again on the podium for McLaren. Perez charged to P4 from P9 as Vettel claims P5 with his first points for Aston Martin, Gasly P6 ahead of the struggling Hamilton, who did secure the fastest lap bonus point, but that was about the only positive of the weekend. Stroll was a lap down in 8th, followed by Ocon and then the two Alfa Romeos. And then converting all of this data to an overview of the positions charts, very boring, extremely boring. Literally no changes whatsoever apart from a couple of the pit stop phases. This is even more boring than some of the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix positional charts that I have seen. And then taking a look at the overall lap time charts for everybody, it's actually fairly interesting, a lot more interesting than I was first anticipating. So this takes into account all of the starting laps, with the slowest lap being 98 seconds. All of the lap times were under 100 seconds. We then see the first round of pit stops between lap 30 and 38, a couple late pit stops, and then some uber late pit stops from the likes of Hamilton, I think Stroll, and also Yuki Tsunoda. But taking a look at the zoomed in section of this lap time chart, we can actually see some quite nice bands of racing. I always love my little bands of racing, like the ones we saw in Spain. But if I just highlight first by these three blue arrows, the first three real bands of racing. We have a nice dark line, which I believe is George Russell off the top of my head, I think. No, Sebastian Vettel, sorry. That dark line in the middle is Sebastian Vettel. That's sort of in between the fast group of cars and the slow group of cars. Then before the first group of pit stops in the middle, we split up into 4 individual bands of racing. We have the first group of cars, which is the likes of the top 5. Then we've got the second group, a then sort of very small third group, and then an even smaller bottom group. Then by this yellow arrow here in the middle, by about lap 44, it's just a jumbled mess of lines. It's just spaghetti. There's all sorts of stuff going on. And then at the very end, we do actually have some more bands of racing just here. We have 2 quite nice and distinct. There's one significant band at the very bottom, which is basically everybody. And then we've got a couple slow cars, mainly people getting lapped, etc. But what does this look like in terms of actual pace? It's all well and good seeing things visually. Over the past, a couple of weeks, I have been working on a clean air lap algorithm to determine the laps that drivers have set in clean air, taking out all of those ones that are set in traffic. Now this time frame varies from track to track, and Monaco, I have set it at 1.2 seconds. So if you are not within 1.2 seconds of the car in front, your lap time will be used in the average that I'm about to pop up on screen. So this completely negates all of the traffic laps, so I'm no longer doing the average competitive lap over the whole Grand Prix. I'm now doing the average competitive clean air lap overall, then working out a percentage pace difference to the leader, and then using that percentage pace difference, I can then average out all of the races so far and see who has been the fastest across this season. So on screen now is the Monaco 2021 average competitive clean air lap, where a clean air lap is when you are not within 1.2 seconds of the car ahead, and this is across the entire Grand Prix. So yes, this does cross over to stints, but I'm covering that in just a little moment's time. And as we can see, it was the two Red Bulls that were fairly comfortable at the top. Perez was actually declared the fastest car across the whole Grand Prix in clean air by just 15 hundredths of a second. Then half a tenth back from that was Carlos Sainz, and then almost 2 tenths back from that was Norris, and then Hamilton was actually the 5th fastest car on track, half a second down on Perez's pace, so Hamilton definitely had the pace to catch up and get at least P4 and perhaps even a podium overall. And then looking all the way down that list, we've got Nikita Mazepin and Mick Schumacher that are both well over a second off being close to Nicholas Latifi. We can then also see the number of clean air laps as well that the drivers have done, and for the majority of drivers this is over 50%. I was not expecting this at all. For Monaco I was expecting values to be, 25 to 30% maximum, and we've got 70% as the maximum value here. But like I said, averaging out all of the percentage values in the middle, the percentage pace difference to the race leader across the 5 races so far, excluding Imola because it was raining, we end up with an overall season's leaderboard in terms of average competitive clean air lap pace. That is a mouthful of this. Hamilton is the fastest across the season so far, then Max Verstappen, then Sergio Perez, Valtteri Bottas, then there is a steep drop-off to Carlos Sainz, and then a very close battle between Carlos Sainz, Leclerc, and Norris. Then it is actually Gasly, Tsunoda, Ricciardo, struggling a little bit in that McLaren, the 2 Aston Martins, Ocon, Giovinazzi, Raikkonen, Alonso, struggling in the Alpine, then Russell, Latifi, and the 2 Haas cars. So I do hope you like that new little addition that is going to appear in all of these episodes of the Race Weekend Data Analysis. I'm now going to very quickly break down the stints overall. So there were 3 compounds of tyres in stint 1 and then also 3 in stint 2. And then Hamilton was the only driver that did 3 stints overall, although it was a tiny little stint at the very end just to bag the fastest lap. The table looks identical. It is the average competitive clean air lap within your first stint on one compound, then the gap, then the percentage gap to the pace leader, and then also the number of clean air laps in that stint, and then your standard deviation across those laps. So on screen now is the soft compound tyre runners for stint number 1, and Sergio Perez in clean air was actually the faster car on track by about 3 tenths a second on Max Verstappen, with Lewis Hamilton down near the bottom, even slower than Valtteri Bottas was, and this, remember, is in clean air, so this is excluding any laps that he was held up by Pierre Gasly. And then taking a quick look at the medium compound of tyre runners, there weren't as many, there was only 5 in this race. There was Raikkonen leading Ricciardo by 3 tenths a lap, then Alonso was close behind, and then there was a big steep drop off to Latifi, who was actually 4 tenths a lap faster than George Russell on the medium compound tyre. And then briefly just taking a quick look at the hard compound tyre runners of stint number 1, there were just the 2, Lance Stroll and Yuki Tsunoda, with Yuki Tsunoda being just over 3 tenths a lap slower than Lance Stroll. And then taking a look at the stint 2 compound runners, for the soft compound there were only 3 drivers, Lance Stroll, Fernando Alonso and Yuki Tsunoda, all within 3 tenths of each other for their second stint on the soft compound of tyre. But as you can see, Yuki Tsunoda went extremely long on his set, and he only did 3 clean air laps on the soft compound of tyre at the very end of the Grand Prix. Then the medium compound runners for stint number 2 look a little bit like this. It is just Esteban Ocon, and everybody went on to the hard compound of tyres, which is led by Max Verstappen. And interestingly, it is Carlos Sainz who is P2 in this list from Sergio Perez, then Norris and Ricciardo as well. Ricciardo had a little bit more pace on the hard compound of tyre in his second stint. Then it was Vettel, Giovinazzi, Gasly, Latifi and Hamilton, even slower on the hard compound of tyre in clean air. And you can see that the majority of people were above 80% in terms of clean air in this stint. That is absolutely ridiculous for Monaco and not what I was expecting. And then, like I said at the very beginning of this stint breakdown, it was just Lewis Hamilton that did a third stint, so I'm not going to put his time up as there's no one to compare him to. Please let me know in the comments below if you have actually enjoyed that little stint breakdown, the clean air lap pace, the average clean air lap pace over the whole Grand Prix as well. I really want to get your feedback on this. But now we're going to break down the teammates and look at the individual race panels. Again, everything is timestamped in the description below, so you can skip to whichever team you would like me to talk about. We are going in 2020 championship order in the constructors, so we start with Mercedes. And for the first time, it looks a little bit bland. But we're going to start in the bottom right, and I'll just take a little bit of time to explain these graphs. This is the percentage pace difference. This takes all of Hamilton's lap times and divides them all by Valtteri Bottas's lap times. Anything that is above 100, it then converts it to a percentage, by the way. Anything that is above 100 is when Lewis Hamilton is going faster, and anything below 100 is when Valtteri Bottas is going faster. These are then ordered from smallest down to largest, and we end up with a nice distribution that looks a little something like this. And then we can split this percentage pace difference down the middle, and we can say that for the laps that both cars were running together until Valtteri Bottas retired, he was going faster for 72.4% of those laps, and therefore for 27.6% it was Lewis Hamilton. And then working out each driver's average competitive clean air lap time across the whole Grand Prix. For Lewis Hamilton this was a 1 minute 15.9, and for Valtteri Bottas it was a 1 minute 16.2. So a 3/10 difference in favour of Lewis Hamilton, but remember Bottas retired in the first stint and Hamilton went all the way to the end. Now turning our attention to the lap chart in the top left, the grey dotted line is the 2019 pace of the fastest Mercedes car, which just so happened to be Lewis Hamilton. And we can see here that it is actually significantly slower, and the average clean air competitive lap time of this set of lines here is a 1:17.5. Much slower, about 1.6 seconds a lap slower than the 2021 car. Then in the bottom left we have the Mercedes gaps, and this is just the gap on every single lap in favour of whichever driver is in front. In this case, Valtteri Bottas was always ahead of Lewis Hamilton up until his retirement. And then in the top right we have the positional charts, which again look very bland and very boring. But turning our attention back to the Mercedes lap chart in the top left, we can highlight this small section here by these light green arrows, where Valtteri Bottas is going just a little bit quicker in the first stint, and he raises the gap to about 10 seconds until he unfortunately retires on lap number 30. And then we get Hamilton's very fast lap, sub 1 minute 13, below 73 seconds on lap number 69. And other than that, there really isn't anything else to report from the Mercedes panel. But now just taking a look at those average competitive clean air laps across the whole Grand Prix, like I said, there is a 1 minute 15.902 for Lewis Hamilton and a 1 minute 16.241 for Valtteri Bottas. However, in stint number 1, it was actually Bottas who was the faster car by just over 1/10 of a second. And they were both on the same tyre compound as well. And then unfortunately we can't compare any stint 2 data, as Bottas did not do a stint 2. So from Mercedes, we then take a look at the Red Bull panel, and again, splitting the percentage pace difference down the middle, we can say that for 38.5% of this Grand Prix, Sergio Perez in the darker line was the faster Red Bull car, and for 61.5% it was Max Verstappen. This is actually one of the smallest advantages Verstappen has had over Perez this entire season. It is normally closer to 80-20. And then working out their average competitive clean air lap times, it was a 1:15.398 for Max Verstappen, and then a 1 minute 15.383 for Sergio Perez, just 100th of a second faster. Turning our attention to the lap chart in the top left, working out their average competitive clean air lap time of 2019, it was a 1 minute 17.590. This is 2.2 seconds slower per lap than their pace in 2021. And then the first thing to highlight for a comparison is this area here, where Max Verstappen is going about 1.5 seconds a lap faster for the first 8 or 9 laps than Sergio Perez, which raises the gap all the way to 20 seconds. However, after lap number 10/12, we have this period here by the yellow line, where they are significantly similar, and the gap stays at around 20 seconds, up until the pit stop phase, which causes a small little dip and a trough in the gap, as Max Verstappen comes in first, and then immediately after that, Sergio Perez comes in. And then between these two dark green arrows, we have an area where they are literally identical. There's absolutely nothing to separate them, and the gap raises from probably 18 seconds to about 22 at the checkered flag. And then comparing the average competitive clean air lap pace across the whole race and the stints between the two Red Bull drivers, across the whole race it was that 1500th lap difference in favour of Sergio Perez. However, on stint 1, it was a little bit larger. Again, both drivers on the soft compound of tyre, and Perez was about 0.3 a lap faster in clean air than Max Verstappen. However, when they turn onto the hard compound of tyre, Max Verstappen flips it around. He is now 0.1 a lap faster than Sergio Perez on the harder tyre. And then from Red Bull, we take a look at Team McLaren. And as always, we split the percentage pace difference down the middle. And for 19.5% of this Grand Prix, it was Daniel Ricciardo that was the faster of the two McLarens. And for 80.5%, it was Lando Norris. This is one of the more significant pace differences of McLaren this whole season. Then working out the average competitive clean air lap pace, it was a 1:15.5 for Lando Norris and a 1:16.4 for Daniel Ricciardo. That is almost a second a lap difference across the whole race in clean air. And then taking a look at their 2019 competitive lap pace, that was a 1:18.4. So again, over 2 seconds a lap slower than their 2021 pace. And then we have this absolutely enormous section from lap number 1 to about laps 24 to 25, where Lando Norris is considerably faster. He's about 1.5 to 2 seconds a lap faster than Daniel Ricciardo, and that raises the gap all the way to over 40 seconds by the first pit stop phase, which comes from Lando Norris, which dips the gap to about 25 seconds. Daniel Ricciardo then comes in immediately after that, and Lando Norris is able to take advantage of his fresh tyre compounds, keeping the gap at about 60 seconds post Daniel Ricciardo's pit stop. Then by this sort of orangey arrow, we have the slow laps of Daniel Ricciardo being lapped / getting blue flags, so he's a little bit on the inconsistent side, which raises the gap over the next few laps to about 80 seconds, and then it ends at over 100 by the checkered flag, which is shown just here by these two grey arrows. There is a nice significant chasm between the two drivers. And then comparing their average competitive clean air lap pace across the whole race and the stints, across the whole race it was that 9/10 difference to Lando Norris across the entire race. And then on stint number 1, however, they were on slightly different compounds. Norris was on the soft and Ricciardo was on the medium. There was a 1.3 second a lap difference between the two drivers. However, Pirelli predicted that there was about a 7/10 difference between the two tyre compounds, so the gap would be about 6/10 a lap. That is still extremely significant. And then for stint number 2, both drivers went onto the hard compound of tyre, and for their second stint, again, Lando Norris was about 3.5 a lap faster than Daniel Ricciardo. Ricciardo was much more competitive on his hard compound of tyre in the second stint. He just wasn't able to catch up in any way, shape or form. And then from McLaren, we take a look at Aston Martin. And as always, splitting the percentage pace difference down the middle, for 36.4% of the Grand Prix, it was Lance Stroll who was going faster. And for 63.6%, it was Sebastian Vettel, with their competitive clean air laps being a 1:15.9 for Sebastian Vettel and a 1:16.0 for Lance Stroll, just under a 10th a lap difference across the entire Grand Prix. And then looking at their 2019 competitive lap pace, that was a 1:18.3, so again 2.3 seconds a lap slower than their 2021 pace. And in a very similar manner to McLaren before, we have this section here for the first 25 or so laps, where Sebastian Vettel is going significantly faster than Lance Stroll every single lap, which raises the gap to about 20 seconds. We then have the first pit stop here from Sebastian Vettel, which brings the gap down to about 6 seconds as Lance Stroll goes extremely long. Sebastian Vettel can't take advantage of his fresh tyre compound, and the two drivers are very even, and the gap stays around 10 seconds until Lance Stroll finally comes in for his pit stop on lap 59, which raises the gap all the way to 30 seconds, and then again they are extremely consistent and very evenly matched until the checkered flag. And then comparing their stint pace across the whole Grand Prix to each other, there was an 800th difference across the whole Grand Prix. And then again in stint 2 they were on varying compounds. Sebastian Vettel was on the soft and Lance Stroll was on the hard, just over a 10th a lap down actually in clean air. And Pirelli predicted a 1.4 second difference a lap between these two compounds of tyres. Now, I think that's a little bit on the extreme side, given the fact that Stroll was only a 10th down on Vettel, as I'm not expecting Stroll to be in the 1 minute 14s sort of pace, or the high 1 minute 14s, low 1 minute 15s on the soft compound of tyre. I think that's a little over-exaggeration. And then once again on Stint 2 they went onto different compounds, as Stroll went onto the softs and Vettel went onto the hards. And again there was a 2/10 difference between the two drivers, with a projected 1.4 second difference between the two tyre compounds. Then from Aston Martin, we take a look at Alpine. And again, splitting the percentage pace difference down the middle, we can see that for 54.5% of the Grand Prix, Ocon was the faster of the two Alpines, and for 45.5%, it was Fernando Alonso, with the average competitive laps being a 1:16.6 for Fernando Alonso and a 1:16.67 for Esteban Ocon. So again, just under a 10th a lap difference between the two drivers in clean air. Very, very similar. But comparing this pace to their 2019 Renault pace, it was a 1 minute 18.347. Once again, just under 2 seconds a lap slower than their 2021 pace. And like the Aston Martin and McLaren drivers previous, we have this section here where Esteban Ocon is considerably faster than Fernando Alonso for the first 25 to 26 laps, which raises the gap to about 25 seconds. It is then the Frenchman who comes in for the pit stop first, which decreases the gap to about 5 seconds, and then immediately after this he takes full advantage of his fresh tyres and raises the gap to about 15 seconds until Fernando Alonso comes in for his pit stop, and the gap raises once again to 40 seconds. They are then even post Fernando Alonso's pit stop till lap 56, where there is then this enormous chasm between the two as Esteban Ocon falls off the pace and Alonso picks it up and decreases this gap from 40 seconds all the way to 5 in just 20 laps. And then comparing the Alpine's stint pace across the whole race in clean air, like we said, across the whole Grand Prix there was just an 800th of a second difference between the two drivers, and then on stint 1 they were once again on varying compounds, with Ocon on the softs 6/10 a lap faster than Alonso on the mediums, with Pirelli's projected time difference of 7/10 a lap between the two tyres. And then for stint number 2, they were once again on varying compounds, with Alonso switching onto the softs and Ocon going onto the mediums, with again just over a 7/10 a lap difference between the two drivers, with that 7/10 a lap difference between the two tyre compounds. And then from Alpine, we take a look at Ferrari, and unfortunately it is blank as Leclerc failed to even start the Grand Prix. So the only thing that we can do is take a look at Carlos Sainz's average competitive clean air lap pace, and that was a 1 minute 15.449, and compare this to their average 2019 competitive clean air lap pace, which was a 1:17.5. So again, just over 2 seconds a lap slower than their 2021 pace. Then we take a look at the Alfa Tauri pair, and once again we split the percentage pace difference down the middle, and we can say that for 16.9% of the entire Grand Prix, Yuki Tsunoda was the faster car, and for 83.1% it was Pierre Gasly. This is the largest difference across this whole Grand Prix, with both drivers' average competitive clean air lap being a 16 flat for Pierre Gasly and a 16.48 for Yuki Tsunoda, so about a 4.5 difference between the two drivers, with their 2019 competitive clean air lap pace being a 1:18.2, so again 2.2 seconds a lap difference between the 2 years, with an absolutely enormous chasm in favour of Pierre Gasly to highlight first between these two light green arrows, where he is over 2 seconds a lap faster than Yuki Tsunoda, which raises the gap in 30 laps to 60 seconds, to a full minute before the first round of pit stops, where it is Pierre Gasly who comes in first, which decreases the gap to about 45 seconds. Then post Pierre Gasly pit stop, he is able to put in a little bit more speed in with his fresh tyre compounds behind Sebastian Vettel and in front of Lewis Hamilton, and raises the gap to again just over a minute, up until Yuki Tsunoda comes in for his super late pit stop on lap 64, raising the gap to about 90 seconds, and that is where the gap stayed until the end of the race. And then comparing the two AlphaTauri drivers together across the whole Grand Prix, their competitive clean air lap pace, there was a 4.5 difference between Gasly and Tsunoda in the Frenchman's favour. And then in Stint 1, again, they were on varying compounds, Gasly on the soft and Tsunoda on the hard. There was a 3.5 difference between the two drivers, with a 1.4 second projected tyre difference between the soft and the hard. And then flipping it on its head in stint number 2, when Gasly takes on the hard compound tyre and Tsunoda takes on the softs, there is just a 300th second a lap difference in the Frenchman's favour, with again that 1.4 second a lap difference projected by Pirelli between the hard and the softs. Then from AlphaTauri, we take a look at Alfa Romeo, and splitting the percentage pace difference down the middle, we can see that for 55.8% it was Giovinazzi in the white who was the faster of the two cars, and for 44.2% it was Kimi Räikkönen, with the average competitive clean air lap pace being a 16.6 for Kimi Räikkönen and a 16.596 for Giovinazzi, just a 1,000th of a second difference in clean air over the entire Grand Prix between the two Alfa Romeos. That is literally as close as you could possibly get. Then taking a look at their 2019 competitive lap pace by this grey dotted line, that was a 1:18.7. So again, 2.2 seconds, 2.1 seconds between the 2 years. Then in a similar manner to Aston Martin, McLaren and also Alpine, we have this section here where Antonio Giovinazzi is consistently quicker for the first 20 or so laps than Kimi Räikkönen, raising the gap to 15 seconds, up until Giovinazzi comes in for his pit stop here, in which there is actually a positional change. Räikkönen gets back in front for just a couple of laps, up until Räikkönen comes in for his pit stop about 15 or so laps later, where Giovinazzi gets back in front. Räikkönen then takes full advantage of his fresh tyre compounds just here post pit stop, decreasing the gap from 25 seconds to under 5 in just 10 laps. However, post this insane decrease in gap, they are then extremely similar, and the gap stays at around 2 to 3 seconds until the checkered flag. And comparing the two Alfa Romeos together, pulling up their average competitive lap time pace across the whole race, there was that 1,000th a second difference between the two drivers in Räikkönen's favour. And then taking a look at their stint 1 pace, it was Giovinazzi on the soft compound of tyre who was just 0.5 a lap faster than Räikkönen on the mediums, with again that projected 0.7 a lap difference between the two compounds. With stint 2 looking a little bit like this, Giovinazzi on the hards and also Räikkönen on the hards, with a 2.5 difference between the two drivers in Giovinazzi's favour. Then taking a look at Haas, we can split the percentage pace difference down the middle, and we can say that for 36% exactly of the Grand Prix, Nikita Mazepin was the faster of the two drivers, and for 64% exactly, it was Mick Schumacher. With the drivers' average competitive lap time being a 17.7 for Mick Schumacher and a 17.9, almost a 1:18 flat, for Nikita Mazepin, with Haas's average competitive lap time of 2019 being a 1:18.5, so just about a second a lap difference between the 2 years. And actually, in the first portion of the Grand Prix by these two red arrows, the drivers were extremely similar, with Mick Schumacher being just about quicker than Nikita Mazepin, raising the gap to about 5 seconds. However, between these two dark green arrows here, all manner of crazy stuff goes down. So not only does Mick Schumacher have a loss of power in this area, allowing Nikita Mazepin to get past, they also have their pit stops and also getting lapped, which means the gap chart goes up and down and up and down and up and down until around lap 45, where it stays consistent at 5 seconds. Where after all of the mayhem of the two dark green arrows, we have this section where they are exceptionally even, hovering around 5 seconds a lap between the two cars. And then by this two sort of orangey arrows, again, they are a little bit on the inconsistent side, where the gap sometimes pops above 5 seconds and sometimes pops below. And then comparing the two Haas cars' stint pace, across the whole Grand Prix there was just a 0.3 difference between the two drivers in Mick Schumacher's favour, and then across stint 1, when both drivers were on the soft compound of tyre, Mick Schumacher was over 0.4 faster than Nikita Mazepin, and on stint 2, on the hard compound of tyre, it was Mazepin who closed that gap, although not to be faster, he just closed it from 4.5 tenths to 0.5 tenth. And then finally, for the race edition of Monaco's race weekend data analysis, we take a look at Williams. And splitting their percentage pace difference down the middle, we can say that for 48.1%, it was Nicholas Latifi who was the faster of the two Williams, and for 51.9%, it was George Russell. Extremely, extremely even, and something we expect to see from Williams, judging by the past couple of races. With the average competitive lap time of the two drivers being a 16.6 for George Russell and a 16.7 for Nicholas Latifi, about a tenth a lap difference. With their 2019 pace being a 1 minute 18.8, so about 2.2 seconds a lap difference between the 2 years. With both drivers being exceptionally even for the first 25 or so laps up until the first pit stop stage, with the gap staying just below 3 seconds consistently for this period, up until it is George Russell's turn to come into the pits first, which relinquishes Nicholas Latifi for a small period of time, until Latifi comes in, where George Russell took advantage for a couple of laps of his fresh tyres, raising the gap post Latifi pit stop to 15 seconds. However, there is then a small mistake / being lapped by George Russell here, which decreases the gap once again all the way to below 5 seconds and below 2 seconds actually, until after this small either mistake or being lapped by George Russell, we have this section of racing where they are exceptionally even once again until the checkered flag. And then comparing the two Williams' average competitive clean air lap pace, we can see that there was a difference of just 0.06 of a second between the two cars over the whole Grand Prix, and across stint 1, when they were both on the medium tyre, it was a 0.4 difference in favour of Nicholas Latifi. And then in stint number 2, on the hard compound of tyre, it was once again Latifi who was the faster car by 2.5 tenths. And there we go, there is the end of the race edition of the Monaco Grand Prix race weekend data analysis. I apologise so much for this one being a little bit longer than I was expecting. I've been recording for 45 minutes now. My throat is extremely hoarse. It's probably going to be about 33 minutes long, hopefully. Apologies, I'll try and work on condensing it a little bit, maybe skipping out a couple bits of information, maybe streamlining some of the sections a little bit more. Now that I'm trialling all of this competitive clean air lap pace and the stints, etc., trying to cover all of my bases to make sure that there are no arguments and no disputes about the data. But please let me know in the comments below if there is anything that you would like to see added / changed about the series. I'm always open to suggestions to chuck it around and mess about with the layout so I can try and make it as appealing to you guys as possible. But that's all I've got for you today, guys. I hope you have enjoyed, and I will catch you in the next episode with whatever and whenever I decide to make it. I'll see you guys then.